Hey everyone, in this video we'll be setting up Cursor on our local machine. So let's go to its website. Before we download for our machine, let's check out its pricing tier. As you can see, it does provide a free version, which I think is quite generous. The difference between free and pro version is with free, the number of models that you can make requests to is limited, and the number of requests you make to those models is also limited. You can for now go ahead and download the free version, especially if you are getting a 2-week pro trial where you will be able to make a lot of requests to the frontier models, even though they might be less than the actual pro version. But eventually I would recommend you move to pro version because that is where you'll be able to optimize Cursor's usage the most. So let's go ahead and sign into our account, and I will continue with my Google account. Now, as you can see, if like me, you are also using this account for the first time, then it will provide you a 14-day trial, which is almost as good as a pro account. It still does not provide you as many requests as the actual pro subscription, but you will be able to use most of the features of Cursor using this trial period. So let's go ahead and start our trial. Now you can fill in these details and download Cursor executable for your machine. So assuming you have downloaded Cursor executable on your machine, we'll get started on the installation process. So double click this. I accept the agreement. You can choose where to install this depending on how much space you have available. I will choose to install this on my D drive. Select next, and we will keep both of these options default, especially the second one where we'll be adding Cursor to our path variable, which will allow us to use it from the command line. So we'll select next and we'll start our installation process. So now that it's installed, let us launch Cursor to see what it feels like. If you're opening Cursor for the first time, it will ask you to log into your subscription account. So let's go ahead and do that. You can just log into this account. We can go back to Cursor. You can import your existing settings from VS Code, but we will skip and continue. You can choose your theme here. I'll choose Cursor Dark. We'll keep this as the default. Because this is a public account, I'm not worried about my data being shared with Cursor. So I'll just check this box and select continue. Now, one thing to remember about Cursor is it's a fork of VS Code. So if we go to VS Code's GitHub repository, VS Code is an open source project. So what Cursor's founders did when they were coming up with this is they essentially forked this repository and then added Cursor specific features over it. So in many ways, if you're already familiar with VS Code, then Cursor will look and feel a lot like VS Code with AI features embedded into it. Now let's start a new project and then open Cursor from command line. So we will close this window. Let's open PowerShell. So we'll create a new folder for our simple AI app. We will cd into that, and from here we will open Cursor by using cursor space dot. And the reason why this will work is because it's already been added to our path variable. Okay, so this is our folder view from Cursor. Before we even start with our application, we'll download one extension which we'll need, and that's Python. Now we will download a lot more extensions as we move along, but for now this is sufficient. And as you can see, it's installing Python as well as Python debugger from Microsoft. Once it's done installing, we will go back to our Explorer view and start our terminal. Now we are inside our folder and all our files will be under this. So this is essentially a root project folder. We will instantiate Python project by using this command uv init. If you're not familiar with uv, it's basically a tool like pip that helps us manage Python packages, dependencies, as well as other aspects of our development. And I'll be linking the video that I have explaining how to use uv to manage your Python dependencies. My recommendation is go through that video if you don't know UV already. It covers everything you need in order to start with this project. Now, before we start using Cursor, it's important to form an appropriate mental model of how to work with an AI coding assistant. Don't think of an AI code editor as something that will spoon feed you into building an application. Rather, think of yourself as a technical architect or as an engineering manager that will be driving these agents like you drive junior interns or developers into building you an application. And it's a different perspective of looking at it, but there is a subtle and an important difference. If you allow these coding editors to spoon feed you an application, you will soon end up hitting walls that you won't be able to progress beyond, okay? But if you imagine yourself as a lead architect, then you can always drive them into producing what you want to build. That also means is it's still super important to build core engineering skills. That necessity hasn't gone anywhere. What has changed now compared to pre-AI world is you don't have to spend a lot of time learning a programming language to start building something that is sufficiently complex and sufficiently useful. So if you don't know the basics of Python already, then my recommendation would be pause this video and spend a few days learning it. Now there are tons of free coding resources like Free Code Camp or W3 Schools that will help you learn the basics of Python in a few days. Don't spend too much time learning the syntax. Once you know the basics, you can start using Cursor, and then you can keep going back to learning more and more about the programming language of your choice. Okay, so you keep developing your programming skills as you keep vibe coding, but always keep that in mind that you need to understand software engineering principles and your programming language of choice well enough so that you can drive the agents rather than the other way around. Now, what we are trying to build is an extremely simplified version of ChatGPT. So for example, if we go to ChatGPT and say if you want to shoot a query, okay, what's the capital of France? And then get a response back. Okay, this is essentially what we want to do. We want to send a query to OpenAI and then get a response back. But because we'll be doing that programmatically, we need something called an API key. So for those of you who are not familiar with what an API is, it's called Application Programming Interface that acts as a middle layer through which we can send user queries to OpenAI's GPT models and get response back. It's like if you go to a restaurant, you don't directly go to chef. You submit your request to the waiter who then delivers it to chef and comes back with your food. Okay, so in order to get the API key, go to OpenAI's API platform. Okay, and you might have to log in to the API platform, and I'll continue with my Google account, and I'll just enter my name. Okay, then you can give your organization name. I'll give mine as Math and Machines. Okay, I'm a data scientist. You can create this organization, and this is where we get to name our API key. Okay, now we'll do this later, and this is the part which is necessary for us to use OpenAI's API is have at least $5 worth of credits with them. The applications that we'll be building, we won't be using most of this credit. Okay, so it's not like the cost will pile up. It will still be limited, but OpenAI will not let you use any API without you having $5 of credits with them. So select $5 as an option, or 10 or 20 if you want to, and we will purchase a credit. So hopefully you have added the credits and landed on OpenAI's API documentation. Let us start creating API key. Okay, so go to settings and go to API keys on the sidebar, and this is where we can create new secret key. You can name it anything. I'll name it my simple key. We will select our default project and we'll go ahead and create secret key. So at this point you have your key. Okay, copy this and store them somewhere safe, either in Notepad or somewhere else, because the moment you click on done, you will lose access to this key and you'll have to recreate another one. So I'll copy this and I'll store it in the Notepad, click on done. So now that we have our API key set up, we will go back to Cursor and create a .env file. So a .env file in context of Python projects is a file which generally holds our credentials. So if you have username or password or anything that you will be using when developing, but you don't want to expose to the rest of the world, you store it in your .env file. And in this case, we want to store our OpenAI API key that we just created. Now it's important you keep the name of your key as exactly this, okay? Because OpenAI's API will by default look for an API key by this name. Okay, so now that we have our API key set up, let's look into this chat window that has open on the right side, which you can toggle using this option, toggle AI pane. Now, arguably, this is the most powerful feature of Cursor, wherein you can send prompts to these AI models and let Cursor work under the hood to give you responses. Before we dive into different features that are available on this chat window, let's write a prompt to get started. Okay, we won't be submitting it yet. We'll just write it into this input box. Create a simple AI application that takes in user query, sends it to OpenAI API and captures response. We won't be submitting it yet. Also, this is an extremely naive prompt. Usually down the line, you want to get to a point where you learn enough about prompting heuristic to give a more detailed prompt that is broken down into discrete specific tasks. So even your initial prompt should be good enough where you have considered your application in detail, different edge cases and trade-offs involved in making it truly production grade. But obviously, because we are only starting out and learning how to build AI applications, we will be using this prompt and then iterating over it. Okay. Now let's use the same prompt and run it in ChatGPT. So if we run this prompt in ChatGPT, it will give us a decent response. So it's giving us the response, including even installing dependencies. And then this is the part which we already did, where we set up our OpenAI API key, and then it will give us the logic of our simple application. Now, the difference between sending a prompt request to ChatGPT versus when we will be doing it from within Cursor AI is that unlike ChatGPT, Cursor is also aware of your code base. Okay? And it does that by indexing your code. So if you go to File, Preferences, Cursor Settings, and select this option, indexing and docs, you can already see that Cursor has indexed 6 files, okay? And essentially Cursor has embedded your code base for improving contextual understanding and knowledge. What this basically means is that Cursor has taken 6 files that exist in your code base into account, and every time you send a prompt to the AI model, what Cursor under the hood will also do is retrieve relevant context from your code base and send that to AI. So the response that you get will be more accurate and it will sync in with your code base. So code base indexing is essentially Cursor's implementation of RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation, wherein it retrieves context from your code, enhances your prompt with it before sending it to the underlying large language model. So there's high likelihood that the response you get is both more accurate and it syncs with your existing code base. And this is a significant point of difference from ChatGPT, which is completely unaware of your code unless you manually enhance your prompt and give it context. But Cursor will do that by default under the hood. Another aspect to remember when it comes to code base indexing is we can choose which files we want Cursor to index on and which files we want it to ignore. In order to view which files have been included in indexing, we can select this option, view included files, and that will show us which files Cursor has indexed. So you might have already noticed one thing, that it has indexed 6 files excluding .env. Cursor by default ignores .env files from being indexed. The reason is quite simple, is usually .env files will have your credentials and other things which you don't want to share with anyone, including Cursor. So Cursor will not be indexing these files, it will not be aware of it, and it will not use it to enhance your prompt. We can also manually choose which files we want to ignore when it comes to including in our context by adding them to a file .cursor_ignore, right? So let's add a file random.txt. This will have something which we don't want Cursor to index and contextualize. So save it. By default, Cursor will sync this file, and you can confirm that part by checking included files. And as you can see, random.txt has been indexed. We don't want this, however. So what we can do is we can include that file in Cursorignore, save it, and resync our code base indexing. And at this point, again, Cursor has indexed the 6 files and it has excluded both .env as well as random.txt, which we now included in Cursorignore file. We can again confirm that part by viewing included files, and as you can see, it has now not included or ignored random.txt. Now going back to our chat AI panel, you can see there are 3 options available in terms of the modes that we want to use: agent, background, and ask. Now for now, we'll just ignore background mode because it is more advanced in terms of how much you need to understand about AI in order to use it. We'll be discussing that down the line, okay, once we have enough understanding of how AI works under the hood. When it comes to ask, this essentially is similar to how ChatGPT works, where you will be sending a prompt to the AI model and the responses that you get will be in line within the chat window. What Cursor will not do is make any changes to your code. And agent mode, you might have guessed, is a much more freer and powerful mode, wherein Cursor will not only give you responses within this chat window, but it will also make modifications in your code base. It will add files, it will delete files, make edits, run terminal commands, etc. We will keep this mode on for now and we'll be using this to begin generating our simple application. You can also choose which mode to keep here by default by going to this option, chat, in Cursor settings, selecting default mode, and I like to keep it agent, but you can choose what suits you. You can also check out this switch AI model drop down, where you'll be able to see different models that you have available, with Claude series models from Anthropic and then GPT-5 from OpenAI. Then we also have this Code Supernova model. As you can see, it is a stealth model from one of Cursor AI's partners, and it's available only for limited time, so not sure if it will be available when you're watching this tutorial. It also has a huge context window with 1 million tokens that you can send. And then you have GPT-5 codex, again from OpenAI. There is an option to add a lot more models than this, and you can check those out by again going to models under Cursor settings, and this is where you can view many more models. And as you get more and more experience at using Cursor and understanding AI, you can select different permutations of models that suit your workflow. For now, we will keep the default options. There's also something called max mode. Turning max mode on will basically increase the size of the message that you send to your AI model. So whenever we send a prompt using Cursor, essentially what happens, we have our raw prompt, which Cursor then enhances with our code context. And it is this combination that gets sent to the AI model. And then obviously we get the output response from the model itself. Now, anytime you're using AI model, and this is true not just for Cursor, but even when we're using APIs of different frontier models, whether it's OpenAI, Claude, DeepSeek, etc., you get charged based on the size of your input message, and that will include your context as well as the size of your output response. What max mode will do is it will increase the ceiling in terms of how much code context Cursor is going to use, and it's going to be much more relaxed about controlling the size of your input prompt. And as you might have guessed, that might also risk increasing the cost of it. And this is also an important aspect when we are building production grade AI applications, where controlling the size of our input context is always important, because we don't want to be sending large messages all the time. Okay, that will pile up costs and it's going to make our product unviable essentially. So for now, we will keep this off, but you can imagine when your code base increases in scale and complexity, you might have to turn it on, but sparingly. You don't want to still keep this turned on at all time. We also have another option, auto, and if you select it, you are basically letting Cursor decide which model to use based on the nature of your request. For now, we will toggle it off and we will keep our model of choice as Claude 4 Sonnet, which I also think is currently the best model when it comes to coding. So let's delete this random.txt because we don't need it anymore. And we'll also get rid of it from our .cursorignore file. Close this. And also close the settings for now. Now let's submit this prompt and see what Cursor comes back with, and we'll keep this option selected. So we are in agent mode and Claude 4 Sonnet is our model of choice. So let's submit. Okay, so it's already started its reasoning process under the hood, and this reasoning process is the combination of both the reasoning process of the model itself as well as what Cursor is doing under the hood. See, it's reading main.py, it's reading our pyproject.toml, and it has also started making diffs into our code. If you look into this pyproject.toml, right, it's already added this merge request or pull request into our code, and in this context, because we are the one driving this agents, we will be the technical lead that will be reviewing and accepting or rejecting this. Okay. Right, so now that we have its full response, let's review the reasoning process. So it read our code files because, again, remember, unlike ChatGPT, Cursor has the context of our code base. So it is reading our files, and then based on what exists in our code base, it is suggesting changes. So in this case, it already sees that we have a pyproject.toml, which is our configuration file. So it added dependencies and description into that file. Okay, and our description looks good, and our dependencies in terms of OpenAI and python.env look good. It seems these changes are good, so we will be keeping all of these changes in this file. Then we can go to our next file, which essentially will be main.py, and my guess is that is where bulk of the changes in terms of this application will have been implemented. So you can see it's importing OpenAI class from OpenAI API, it's importing load.env, then it's loading our environment variables. So this is basically what we have in our .env file. For now, it's OpenAI API key. It is then instantiating OpenAI's class and submitting this API key. It's submitting a chat request to OpenAI's completions API with this as the model and this as the message, and then the max tokens are 500 and temperature 0.7. And we will be diving into detail in the future tutorials on what tokens mean, but tokens essentially are to decide what should be the size of your input prompt, the maximum size of your input prompt, because remember, we want to always control for our input prompt size because that is where the cost will come from. Then we have temperatures. So you can think of temperature as a knob that you use in order to scale how imaginative you want the model to be. So the values that are accepted are between 0 and 2. The lower the values, more deterministic or focused the model will be, and the higher the values, more exploratory or imaginative it will be. And here we have our response content being returned from the method. It has also used try exception catch block. So if there is any error when we are making this API call, we capture it. And then we have our main method that will be calling essentially when we call this application. Okay, print commands, then just checking whether we have an OpenAI key, and then it's starting an infinite while loop. It's basically starting a command line interface wherein we will be either quitting if we don't want to shoot any query to our AI model, and if we have an input query, then in that case it will be submitting that query to the method which we just looked at here and getting the response back, and that response will be then printed. This looks like it should work, so let's keep this changes also, and then we'll review the next file And that's basically the changes in our readme file. Okay, we'll just accept it. You can also preview the readme file if you want to by opening a preview on the side, and it basically looks like this. So we'll keep that for now. So that's about it. It's reasoning process. If you want to go through it in more detail, it seems 5 different steps here. The first one was to set up the project structure, but obviously because we already had a project structure set up, it didn't have to do much there. It also did not have to create the main application file because we already had main.py. So it just went ahead and made changes, injected code into that file. Okay, and this is the summary of what Claude did when we asked it to create a simple application. So let's go to our main.py and let's just run it from command line. Okay, clear this. We will be running uv run main.py, and at this point uv will first look at pyproject.toml where AI model injected these dependencies, and it will be downloading those dependencies first. We also get a prompt on the lower left side here that we noticed a new environment has been created. Do you want to select it for workspace folder? We can either select yes here, or we can select it on the lower right corner here by clicking on it and then selecting our .venv virtual environment. And as you can see, once UV was done installing those dependencies, our main.py file was executed and we have our command line interface. And this is where our application is expecting us to write a user query, and then it will give us a response. So let's write a simple query which we already wrote on ChatGPT. What's the capital of France? Okay, and at this point it will send a request to OpenAI's API, more specifically the chat completions API, and capture the response. And this is a response. We can also make this prompt a bit more detailed. So you can say, what's the capital of France? Feel free to dive into its geopolitical and historical details. Okay? And expecting a more detailed response this time around. As you can see, it has given us a more detailed response because our prompt was asking for it. Okay, now let's quit this application by using quit. And at this point, we are out of our AI application. Okay? So that's it for this video, where we have set up Cursor on our local machine and reviewed its important features, as well as used it to build a simple but useful AI application. Okay, in the upcoming videos we'll be iterating over our prompts and adding more features, as well as redesigning our AI application. Okay?